again. Okay. My name is Eusebia Flores. Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm a program coordinator here at HealthConnect 1, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Our HealthConnect mission is HealthConnect is the national leader in advancing respectful, community-based, peer-to-peer support for pregnancy, birth, breastfeeding, and early parenting. Our vision is to see every baby, every mother, and family thrive in a healthy community. We work to achieve this vision throughout an equity-focused approach, supporting the first 1,000 days for birthing families. This webinar is made possible by the WK Kellogg Foundation. Before we continue, I am going to go through some logistics. I would like to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded. All of you are in listen mode only. Please use the feature, the chat feature to for any comment, question. For technical issues and managing the chat, I have the honor to co-work with Brenda Reyes, or one of our program managers. In case you need or want to be unmuted, please raise your hand. Also, after this webinar, an evaluation, a survey will be sent to everyone, as well as the recording. Before the poll, I would like to introduce our speakers for today. Molly Chappell is currently the Executive Director of BirthMatters. She received her BA in Sociology and Psychology from Converse College and completed her Master's of Social Work from the University of South Carolina. Molly is the founder of BirthMatters, a non-for-profit organization replicating HealthConnect 1's community doula program. One of her main job responsibilities is to secure funds by writing grants and hosting fundraisers. She is currently certified through DONA. Molly is compassionate about empowering women and families to understand the choices about birth and parenting. She also believes in the importance of prenatal connection. In 2011, she was honored with the Heroes in the Field Award from South Carolina March of Dimes. Our next presenter for today is Dalvery Blackwell. She is the Executive Director and a co-founder of the American Breastfeeding Network. She is an international board-certified lactation consultant and holds a bachelor's in journalism and communications. Celebrating 10 years of service to the community, the African American Breastfeeding Network was established in 2008 to address breastfeeding disparities by increasing awareness of the benefits and value of mother's milk, building community allies, and denormalizing formula use. AABN's mission is to promote breastfeeding as the natural and the best way to provide optional nourishment for babies and young children. Through Ms. Blackwell's leadership and vision, African American Breastfeeding Network has built eminent goodwill in the community. The organization has been recognized and highlighted in local, state, and national media and reports. Most notably the April 2015 Essence magazine, 10 Things People Are Talking About, January 2015 Associated Press 2014, CDC Breastfeeding Report Card, and the 2014 Black Child Development Institute of Milwaukee report. Being Black is not a risk factor. Statistics and strengths-based solutions. She has been instrumental in creating and building AABN's core program, Community Breastfeeding Gatherings, which is seen as a national model. Blackwell's alliances with community leaders and institutions had coined her champion for family-centered health. In 2015, she was among 50 national leaders selected to participate in a 2-year cohort study, Racial Equity at the Center for Social Inclusion. She received the 2017 Women of Commitment Award from the Wisconsin Alliance for Women's Health. This year, she is a Milwaukee Community Journal 2018 Year of the Child, a game changer honoree. Prior to working in lactation support, Ms. Blackwell worked for the Black Health Coalition of Wisconsin for 10 years as a program coordinator. In the capacity, she worked in tobacco control and was instrumental in helping to pass the statewide law to ban smoking in public places. She and her husband of 18 years and her 2 preteen children, Sekua and Aldous II. I hope I pronounced them right. I'm sorry, Dalvery.
You could. Oh, no worries. You could. You pronounced it correctly. Thank you.
Now, after I presented our great speakers, we would like to pull a poll, and give me 1 minute. And okay, so this is a question posted by our first panelist. Are you a registered? And she would like to know if you are registered, non-for-profit, or have 501c3 status. Yes, no, working on it. And we are going to give you about 3 minutes. Okay, so it looks like 20, I'll share the results. So it looks like yes, 27%, no, 46%, and working on it, 38%.
All right. So first, thanks to HealthConnect One for hosting this, and of course, the BELA community being interested in these topics. I just want to first cover, it was good to hear whether the participants in this webinar have already secured their 501c3 status and are a registered nonprofit or working towards it, or not quite there yet. So I'm going to even out my time on all of these slides because it seems like we have a good mixture of folks out there. So certainly send in the questions and raise your hand if you have questions, so I will slow down or make sure I'm clear. The first slide, I wanted to just cover exactly the different types of funding that is out there and what they expect from people or organizations that they fund. So there's federal and state funding, and they award based on strict guidelines. They have objective evaluations, and they have formal reporting that is tied to their funding. I want to just say that if you have some experience with grant writing, you should explore federal and state opportunities. I would discourage that being your first grant that you write, and the reason being is it does take a lot of time. You don't always have a lot of time to get a federal and state grant completed. Usually 30 days, and they're, it's sometimes up to 45, 50 pages long. So I would encourage the where you are in your grant writing skills to consider, always look for opportunities and understand what's available. A lot of times what they will post one year will be available in another year. So sometimes just exploring and getting yourself ready and prepared for next year's announcement is what I would encourage you to do. Some people will contract out with grant writers for the federal and state funding opportunities. And if you are at that stage in your organization or have those gifts and friends that you're connected to, certainly use that. I put that resource, the grants.gov. And the next side of the slide is going with the private foundations and the more local communities. So they tend to be more relational and they're more subjective. And the reporting tends to be less formal. So sometimes they will want to just come and do a site visit and talk to you about how the funding was actually used and how you found yourself, getting to outcomes, and they'll want to just have conversations. And then sometimes they will want you to do a write-up or a blog post for them or come speak to their board to explain exactly how the funds were used. And the resources I put there were the foundationcenter.org. We have used our local library resource. You can go there and you can talk to a media specialist and just say, hey, I want to search for grants. And they will spend time with you, helping you understand how to do a good local search, or again, they could help support you to find those federal and state opportunities as well. And then explore businesses and award funds. You want to develop relationships all through your funding community. And a lot of times I had a hard time with this in the beginning, understanding that those relationships mattered and taking the time to speak to anyone that was interested. That in the long run does matter when someone you're talking to 4 years ago, someone I was talking to 4 years ago, now sits on a board that decides where the money goes. And so you want to always be ready to do some pitching and explaining exactly what it is you do and why you do it well. And you want to always start there with the relationships. Okay, next slide. So this is a biggie. You want to always ensure that it's the right fit before you write for a grant. And that means a lot of things. That means, are the goals and priorities in line with what it is you and your organization accomplishes and the impact. You want to always take the time to read the eligibility guidelines. Again, some of y'all aren't 501c3. There are a lot of funders that do award outside of just the 501c3 status, but that's something you definitely want to, you know where you are. So when you're reviewing guidelines, you want to definitely take the time to understand if this is a good fit. What I'm enjoying in the last couple years, a lot of the local funders here will do they'll have you do a letter of intent, which says exactly who you are and what it is that you provide to the community. And they'll want to have a little meeting, an interview, to make sure they're a right fit for you. So you don't spend, 5 to 10 hours completing the full grant application. It's nice when they say up front, this isn't the right fit. Here, if you want to look at it or consider doing these services, we would entertain that for next year. And again, it's just honest feedback. It doesn't always feel great when you walk away realizing, that ain't going to work out like I'd hoped it would. But again, you won't have to have, wasted your time completing the full application because they were honest with you. Deadlines are huge. Grant makers do not make exceptions on deadlines. And it's down to the minutes. I was down to the minutes submitting a grant one time. And if you're past that hour, unless you have that relationship, they're not going to extend it. They just will not, because they can't do that for everyone. So they do it for none. And then always look for the amount that their funding is available. Most funders will have a page on their website of who they've funded in the past. I would definitely explore that and understand, if you read that they're giving out $250,000, but then when you read who they funded last year and they gave a lot of $10,000 to $15,000 grants, and awarded a lot of organizations, then you don't need to go in and ask for the full $250,000 for you. It's fine for you to be transparent about your full budget, but I would not ask for an unreasonable amount, because it might not get you far in the grant process. So definitely understand what's reasonable for the particular grant, the funder. And then if there's any cost sharing and matching gifts, so a lot of the community foundations love to have a matching gift, which means you find $10,000, we'll give you $10,000. And you don't, if you know that getting a match is going to be very, very hard, then don't don't apply for that. Wait until you're in a good place where you know you can get that match. And don't ask for an amount that you know you can't match. If they're in the business of giving out $10,000, but you know you can find a $5,000 match, then be honest about that and say, I have someone who's willing to match if we're able to get $5,000. Of course, it goes double the amount and goes further. And then, of course, making sure that it's feasible for you. If you have a team that works with you on how to complete the application, always consider that. So the next slide are the SMART objectives. And this is what we want to make sure you are going ahead and thinking real specific about. The one thing I wanted to mention is it is realistic. We want to be realistic with y'all. And, Dalvery and I have been doing this for a while, but we can be honest that, the research says for every 4 grants or 4 funding applications you submit, you're going to receive 1, especially in the beginning. So don't get discouraged. Hang in there. Sometimes you get your head down a little bit. You need people surrounding you that's gonna lift you up and say, oh no, you got in front of the right people this year. Next year when it comes time, hopefully you'll know exactly how to make that application even better. And I had no problem asking a funder if I could come in and understand exactly what it was about my application that I need to be proactive for next year's funding and understand exactly why you weren't funded. Some people will not entertain that conversation, but there are plenty of people, and that you need to be vulnerable enough to hear what is it that we need to work to make it look different. And a lot of people know about the logic model, knows about how to put the SMART objectives together. This has to do with a model called Getting to Your Outcomes. And it's the S, the M, the A, the R, the T. So the SMART objectives. So we want to make sure you are very specific and that you what exactly do I want? I cannot see my full slide. Can somebody, I guess I'll put this down. Okay. Yeah. What exactly do I want to achieve? So be specific. And I'm going to give you an example, but I want to walk through all of this first, and then I'll tell you the example. Measurable. And you have to break it down into something that you can measure. It has to be concrete. Achievable. So you have to know that you can achieve this goal. Do not say something that you know you're not going to be able to do. And that has to do with being realistic. And then times and deadlines, you have to always be specific enough in when you are going to reach this goal. Another thing for us to understand is that when we're thinking through you will have a couple of these objectives, and you want to be intentional. The better intentional you can be about, okay, in 12 months, I want to secure X amount of money. Be ideal, but be realistic. So sometimes in the beginning of the year, I will know what my budget is, and I will say, okay, my realistic goal is to cover my full budget. But I want to go big, and I'm going to be idealistic and say I'm going to, raise this much money. And again, you want to condition yourself to know what the amount is that you need to be able to serve the needs in your community. And again, you can go big with one amount, but then have a more realistic, achievable goal for yourself. And then, the example that I want to give you is, I pulled this from one of my grants recently. It says that by December 2019, Our doulas will recruit and enroll 54 targeted mothers prior to 25 weeks in gestation. So it was very specific. It was very measurable. I'm going to know by these 12 months, I will know if I've been able to, we've been able to recruit and enroll 54 mothers. And it also goes on to the time frame. And I also, after this, I wrote who was responsible. So that's the next step of, the executive director, the doula staff, who is responsible for reaching that particular outcome and that goal. And a lot of times we get wordy and we add a lot of language that isn't necessary in grants, and that's why they've gone to actually having word count in a lot of their grants. So the more, if you could go ahead and practice and have a SMART objective before you even start looking and exploring if this is a right fit, the more likely you'll be able to reach their deadlines and get things done on time. So it's a good exercise. If we were doing the hands-on training, I would ask y'all to sit down and actually write something that you can accomplish in a 12-month period. So next slide. This is my last slide, and this really has to do with, for those of you who don't have the nonprofit status, and for y'all who do, I know y'all know it is all about building the relationships and spending time with those relationships. Getting to your outcomes, what it is that you offer and why you offer it. And what I want to suggest is that, if you are a startup or you're thinking about getting serious and taking it to the next step of being a 501c3 nonprofit, t-shirt sales are great. I am realistic and want you to know that the real purpose of doing t-shirts is to have some public awareness. It's not to make money. If you make money, that's great. But really the purpose is to let people know who you are and what it is you do. It does draw a lot of conversation, and it's something you can ask your supporters to invest in to cover the cost. I don't want anything coming out of your own pocket. So you do want to, you want to see if you can get the cost of the t-shirts covered. You will have to pay for it up front. And so there's there's that piece that, you do need to, there are no companies that are going to necessarily, print your t-shirts for you without you doing the upfront cost. And, it is hard work. And it is best if you have a logo, or at least a name for who you are. And that's okay if that changes as you evolve. But for right now, the idea is that you want people to know who you are and what you're doing in their community. So therefore, a t-shirt is great. Another thing is a lot of restaurant percentage sales will, you can go in and you could ask them if they would give you a percentage of the sales that day. And Chipotle does this already. There are a lot of restaurants that do this. And some do expect you to have the nonprofit status, but there are a lot of them that don't. And you're just going to have to research. The locally owned restaurants will be very open to this, especially if you can, say, hey, I'm going to let all my supporters and my stakeholders know about this event. Because that will help increase business for them for that day or for that evening. Some do it for the full day, some do it for a couple hours. And, you get 5, sometimes 3, 5, 10% of whatever is, whatever they made during those hours or that day. And so that's a good way to build relationships, and then, of course, get some startup money. And then I'm a big believer in presentations to any group that will have you come speak to them. And you want to practice this. You want to get people that you're close to tell you, hey, you want to change this, that in the language that the group that you're going to speak to is going to understand, and really master how to do a presentation. And that can be churches, local clubs. You think of any groups that get together and want people to come present. You want to know that all of them at some point in a year decide where they're going to give some money to. And for you to have been in front of them and to be considered, that's what you want. So at the actual presentation, you might not realize that there could be some money in the future that comes to you because of that presentation. So I think I am finished. I think we're going to take questions if anyone has any.
Yes, now we are taking questions. You can type your question in the chat room, and Brenda will be attending. It is attending the chat. Questions or comments?
Thank you. So currently we have a comment from Mika McGuire who's sharing that this is so informative, and we're thanking you for that feedback. So feel free to also type in your questions using the chat box. Damaris Crespo is asking us, what is a 501c3, Molly?
Okay, so that is the process you go through to become a nonprofit. And there's a state level process that you have to get approved first. And then once you get approved through your Secretary of State, you then go to the RS for the 501c3 status. So there's a state level and then there's a federal level process. And then once you're deemed that, it means that you are not in the business of making more money than you spend. And it has to be tied to a good cause or a benefit. What you're offering, you're helping the community in some way. And again, the Secretary of State decides whether you're worthy of becoming that and becoming an organization. And then the feds sign off on the federal level as well.
Thank you, Molly. There's another question from Jaretha McKinley. She's saying, how did BirthMatters get started? What was the first grant?
Okay, so the first step for us was we wanted to do a planning grant. We wrote a planning grant. So that is something I did not mention in my slides. So thank you, Jerry. There are foundations that will give you some money to plan and decide if your community is ready for whatever services you have decided your community needs. And what that means is that it's startup money, and there are local foundations that will, let you come in and pitch and say, hey, I want to explore if my whole deal is I want to explore if Spartanburg is ready to believe that doula services need to be offered to all women of lots of different backgrounds. And during that planning grant process, I did focus groups, and we decided on our population we would focus on, and so it gave me 18 months to write a real grant and get tied into a larger organization. So I didn't start out as an independent. BirthMatters did not start out as an independent. We were informed during that planning process that it would be best if we would fall under another organization that does similar work, and that was the route we went. And we were there almost 5 years.
Great. So there's lots of questions there. I'm just going to take two more just
Okay.
because I also want our other presenter to present her information. So I'm just going to take 2 more questions, and I promise we will get back so that both of them, I also want Dalvery to present. People are amazed. Here's another question. What kind of organizations have you found are most receptive to giving funds to work for doulas, Molly? And what has it looked like to work with health clinics, hospitals to find funding?
Okay. So, so a little background of, I used to work at our local healthcare hospital here. So I had a lot of relationships within the hospital. And so again, going back to building on those relationships, they were the local hospital foundation is who agreed to take us under their wing while we were doing the planning grant process. Because again, they didn't want to give money directly to Molly. They would give it somewhere that would house or host our planning process. So I went to the local hospital healthcare foundation and they housed us. So as far as what funders are interested in doula, we are very fortunate in Spartanburg to have one of our local foundations believe in this work, and they have been a key partner, and they gave me my planning grant, and they continue to fund me to this day. So some of their leadership team back in the beginning days was open and understood the value of doulas. So anytime you can find someone who gets the doula model, you want to really continue to nurture that relationship. And March of Dimes came along, but I wrote them 3 times. So like I said, for every 4 grants you write, you get funded. That took several years to get funded through our state March of Dimes chapter. And now they're pretty consistent on funding us. So I want everybody to know, those no's are not doors closed. There's still a crack in that door. When you get a no from a funder, go back, nurture the relationship, explain how you're changing lives and what you're doing. Even if it's a small amount of families that you're serving or people that you're serving, those few families can have a large impact on your story. So don't overcommit and don't say you're doing huge. You never want to go to a funder and say, I served 50 families last year on a budget of 5,000 and I'm asking you for 10 and I only want to serve 50 families again. They're going to look at you and say, hold on a second, you did that with 5. Why do you need it? Never, don't do too much for no funds. If that makes sense. I hope that makes sense.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Totally makes sense. Thank you so much, Molly, yes, for sharing. There are lots of questions and comments. People are giving shout out to Mary Black Foundation, yes, shout out to March of Dimes. This is wonderful. It's encouraging. If you want to take some time to also use the chat, Molly, to respond to a few questions, that would be awesome. Let's move forward with Dalvery. Dalvery, you're on.
It's 10:30 here in Milwaukee. First of all, I'd like to give a shout out and a big thank you for HealthConnect 1 and for their wonderful BELA project for hosting this webinar. And also I would like to thank Azibia for helping me and working with me the last couple of days to get our PowerPoint and the technology working. The first thing that I want to say is Molly did a wonderful job. She laid out the meat of grant writing. And so my presentation, I'm going to give you some dessert to enjoy. So the first thing I want to say is your first grant is your skeleton grant. What's in a skeleton grant? It's really important. Once you get your first grant the way that you want it, that you use that grant as much as you can throughout securing funding. Your first grant, as Molly alluded to when she talked about SMART objectives, gives a picture of really what you want to do specifically. What I like about the skeleton grant, which I call it, is that your skeleton grant can be submitted to other funders as a proposal, particularly if you did not get funding. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. Or you can also use your skeleton grant for writing another grant in upcoming years. So your first grant is really important, I think. 4 common questions that are usually a grant consists of, or the main questions that they want to ask, that they want you to address, funders want you to address, is to lay out your organization's purpose and or the mission of your organization. So before you even start your grant, make sure that you have your organization has a purpose and your mission statement is clear, it's agreed upon by your board of directors, and it's already public, so you're not constantly changing it. Funders also want to know sometimes upfront the amount that you're requesting. And as Molly shared with you in her presentation, is when you're asking for funding and you ask for a specific amount, make sure that that amount is realistic and is something that you really, the amount that you need to do your program. And then the second or the third question that is common in the skeleton grant is stating your need or the problem that you're seeking to address. That's very common as well. And then they want to know, and it's basically having to do a lot with your budget, how do you intend to spend this funding? So what are you going to use the money for? Next slide. Okay. So mutual partnerships with the fiscal partner is very important, and I'm going to take a moment to just elaborate a little bit on your what's a fiscal partner, or some people call fiscal partners also sponsoring partners. So this is an organization, if you don't have your nonprofit status, which was in the case of AABN, my organization, we did not have our nonprofit status for 6 years. And so we partner with other organizations in the community that have similar mission statements and similar goals, and that was really interested in the work that we were doing to be our fiscal partner. And a fiscal partner basically is like your accountant, an organization that they have to agree to accept the funding from your grant, and they actually manage your money, they write your checks, but they could do a lot more than that. So one of the things that is important when you do find your fiscal partner is find ways that you can link and connect with other appropriate programming that they may have. For example, if you have a fiscal partner that also does prenatal care coordination, you might want to refer some of your mothers to their program. So really finding ways to partner. Also, meet with your fiscal partner, the staff, on a regular basis to develop relationships, because sometimes fiscal partners feel that, oh, I'm only needed to accept your grant and to accept your funding and to write checks, but they could do so much more than that. So that's really all I want to say about the mutual partnership with the fiscal partner. It's really important. My next slide is all about the money. It's really important that you keep a ledger or keep a record of the funding you got and how it's being spent in the different categories, regardless of the grant amount that you get. So for example, I'm going to use my organization. When we first started out, we was not a nonprofit, and we were getting small pots of money like $500 or $800, and we kept a record, a ledger, or like an Excel sheet of how that money was being spent, so that we can show accountability, and so that we can see where the money was being spent, but more importantly, how we can build a program and how much additional resources and funding we would need in the future. Another important thing I would suggest is that when you do receive funding, nothing is more embarrassing than to say you couldn't spend all the money. So make sure that when you receive money that you have the capacity and the resources and your vision to spend all of the money that's allocated to you, and that you have it appropriated in the budget items, so that when your grant is over, all of your dollars are spent, and it also can be used as an impetus for additional funding. But nothing is more embarrassing than to ask for $10,000. You receive a grant for $10,000, but you only spent $5,000. AABN, since we started, and I learned this when I was working in tobacco control for a number of years, we started collecting data from day one. So basic data, like demographic data, attendance data is very important, and you can collect it in raw form through surveys, or you can actually, go on, put it into an Excel file. I would suggest that you put it into some type of software package or something like an Excel file, or actually start inputting the data for analysis. So just making sure you collect data on your outcomes that Molly articulated earlier and shared in one of her slides, achieving your outcomes and your goals. Using infographics to tell a story is really important. I think it's impressive because, as you can imagine, funders don't have a lot of time, and sometimes they don't require a report. Sometimes funders, particularly foundations, don't require that you give a midterm report. In that situation where your funders do not require a midterm report, I would suggest that you actually give them overview of the progress of your grant and where you are. I provided an example of what we did at our year end last year, just giving one of the funders, all of our funders, an idea through this infographic of the impact that we've had. Make sure that you share your success stories through social media platforms, because believe it or not, funders are looking at that as well. They're looking at your webpage. They're looking at other social media platforms that you may use. AABN have decided that we are going to invest in social media. So we do have a budget item for that, because we use social media a lot to publicize, to tell our story, to show our impact, and to communicate to a larger audience. Next slide. Accepting the rejection email. So I remember when we first started and we were writing for smaller grants, I became very saddened. Like when I would spend hours writing a grant and thinking that it was the best grant ever and the best project ever, and I would receive a rejection call, phone call, or email, and I became really disheartened and frustrated and sad. So I would suggest that you actually practice or tell yourself, like, okay, if I don't get this grant, it's okay, because I can, as Molly said before, you can always go back and say, okay, I would like to have a meeting and sit down and talk about how do I make this grant better for reapplying next time, or what wasn't there that I should have put there. So I strongly encourage organizations that are just starting off, who haven't had rejection letters, who haven't really written their first skeleton grant, to be prepared for rejection phone calls and rejection emails as well. Next slide. Just a couple other notes about accepting rejection emails. It's always polite and appropriate and politically correct to always apply. Thank you for reviewing my grant. We appreciate this opportunity. For example, I look forward to talking to you in the future. And then following up in a couple of days and actually requesting a meeting with the funder. As I mentioned earlier, self-practice or rejection responses, meaning just practice with yourself, talk to others about the possibility of not getting funding. I mentioned already, ask how you can improve your proposal. And it's always nice to get a card of Funders are always glad to just get maybe a card or send some flowers, just showing your appreciation for reviewing the grant and replying to your proposal as well. Okay, is that it? I think that's my last slide. I welcome any questions that anyone has. Can I brighten the?
Yeah, so Dalvery, there is Sankofa who's saying, greetings to all. Dalvery, can you brighten the light in your room? Not able to see your lovely face. Oh,
okay. I'm gonna
see you.
Is that better? Is it darker?
Yeah, I think it's darker. I don't know if it could be the light
I have
behind.
one option, either. I'm really sorry about the lighting. I apologize.
That's okay. We have a question, Dalvery. Let me see. Andrea Williams, she wrote in our Q&A. Can you share your thoughts on fees and any challenges working with fiscal sponsorship?
The first part of the question I didn't hear, Brenda.
Can you share your thoughts on fees and any challenges working with fiscal sponsorships? That's
a great question. So we haven't used a fiscal agent in a while because now we're nonprofit, but typically it's between 6 to 10%. And it's really important to get that understanding up front, the percentage of the grant that your fiscal agent or your sponsor agent will need to actually administer your grant. And as in anything, you need to get everything in writing and have a contractual agreement with your fiscal agent. As Molly alluded to earlier, partnerships and making sure it's the right fit is so important. So for organizations that do not have a nonprofit at this time, I would strongly suggest that you start developing a relationship with a potential organization in your community where you think where you believe that they would be a good fiscal partner, and to ask them if they're interested. Lessons learned. The main lesson learned is, from my experience, many fiscal partners believe that their primary role and the only role that they can serve is to administer the funds in your grant. And there's so much more that they can do. And asking if, for example, asking, for example, if they will be willing to provide all of your copying. We worked on a grant where we was using 5 different surveys. We needed access to a copier, so they allowed us to use their copier. Asking for meeting space. Meeting space is important as well. Asking for supplies. The sky is really the limit, because when usually fiscal agents are larger organizations that have the extra resources that could support your programming. Excuse me.
Great. So there was a question about, let me see here, because I know not everybody might be in a computer, but there were some really good questions that I want to go back to that I think would be helpful. What is the cost for a 501c3?
I think it's between $300 and $500.
Yes, to submit the application, it's just a couple of $100. And a lot of people feel like attorneys have to create the application, but that is not accurate. I was under that assumption as well, and I had a friend help me who was an attorney, but that's just one of those myths. It's definitely something you want several people to review and read before you mail it in, but it's not necessary that you pay an attorney to create the document for you.
Thank you.
I agree with what Molly said. We had someone on our board to actually help with the application.
Awesome. So there's a comment from Ophelia Griffin. She said, I have heard that it's best to piggyback off a similar nonprofit. Does that matter?
I can just speak to the partners that I went and visited with before we became offering the program services. And United Way was very kind and very clear with me to say, you're better off going and existing with someone. So sorry. You're better off going and exploring existing underneath someone else. So for y'all who are really thinking about starting up, I would encourage you to partner with someone. And when the right time comes, if you do evolve and want to become your own separate 501c3, I would, it's a natural process between the lead organization that gave you your wings, and the time is usually very mutual.
Awesome. There's a question from Jerry to both of you. How much money did you get? And I'm assuming that was on the first grant that you ever submitted. But Jerry, correct me if I'm wrong.
So for AABN, our first grant was like $500. Wow. And we needed a fiscal agent even for the $500. And I was grateful for the $500. I set very realistic goals to use it, but our first amount was about $500.
Thank you.
And ours was, I'm pretty sure the planning grant was $7,000 for us. And that should shed some light, because I do think that my planning grant was a lot. I think you could be more realistic of the $500, $750 amount to get a little startup and get a little going.
All right. We have another question from Jill Watnick to both of you. Can you talk about a needs assessment and the role of doulas? I'm concerned about how to communicate the role of doulas in a realistic and respectful way in a very technocratic system of delivering healthcare, since there are so many factors that impact birth outcomes. Not sure if this makes sense.
So I was responding to that. I didn't quite know how to respond directly to her, but I really do think that might be y'all's next webinar topic. I do think that language is very powerful, and it goes a little bit along the lines of your pitch, but it really you have to have like 3 versions of what it is you say you do and the impact you have, and you have to get to the place where you've mastered which one you think is going to speak to who you're talking to. And that takes a lot of time. And I can remember when people were telling me that, and I was like, I can barely get my one figured out. And they're telling me I need to know who I'm talking to and change it up to be prepared for who I'm talking to. But that takes a lot of time. And you just need to start instead of, I do think thinking through a lot of things is helpful, but if you just keep thinking about how to do it and not do it, you're never gonna get any kind of wings. You're just gonna need to do it and learn from it. You're gonna make mistakes, and you'll figure it out and you'll adjust. That's where I am with that.
Thank you. Dalvery, do you have anything to add to that question?
The needs assessment, we don't provide doula services at this time. We did get our first, I would say it's a planning grant this year that we started, and we're doing an informal needs assessment. So I think it's really important to learn from your community and hear from your community what their thoughts are, what their interpretation of birth work is, because in Milwaukee, the women of childbearing age are not really familiar with birth work, so a needs assessment can help you identify some of the gaps and some of the needs. the only thing I can say at this point is that I think it's really important.
Thank you, Dalvery. We have another question from Damaris Crespo in Puerto Rico, and I'm going to read it both in Spanish and then in English. ¿Qué tan probable es que al buscar un socio fiscal que tenga una misión y visión similar a la de nuestra organización surjan celos, desconfianza o situaciones similares? How likely it is that when looking for a fiscal partner that has a mission and vision similar to that of our organization, jealousy, distrust, or similar situations arise?
I like to answer that question. So your fiscal partner is a very important team player. So I would recommend not jumping too quickly with partnering with the organization that say that they're interested in being your fiscal partner. It's much better to establish relationships without any funding being available and having a healthy collaboration with an organization that you work with different projects, and having that approach versus searching for someone or asking for an organization once you get funding that you've not really worked with, if that makes sense. Because those kind of issues can come about. Having a memorandum of understanding is critical and important. I would certainly recommend that to avoid some of the situations that may occur.
And the only thing I would add to that is in your memorandum of agreement, you always have a clause that says at any time we can choose to leave. So rest in that and know that if you're naturally going to have some aches and pains, and you have to decide as a leader how much of that is worth or devaluing who you are and what you stand for. But you always have that clause in the MOA that says if at any point you want to dissolve this, you can, and that does protect walking away.
Thank you. There's another question from Sabrina Butler who's sharing. Should you ask for as much money as you want in hopes to get any money, or you should ask for small amounts?
I think you should ask for the money you need. So after identifying your need for the funding that you need, doing a budget is important. Having your budget, a clear and accurate budget. Because as I mentioned before, nothing is more embarrassing than to ask for a certain amount of money and you don't use it all, or ask for funding and you don't have enough to do your project. So I would never ask for more hoping that, or I would never ask, I would ask for what I need.
Yes. And then the only other piece to add to that is I do think that you look in to see what they usually fund and be realistic. Because you may need $55,000, but if you see, and you can show them that your program services expense cost is $55,000, but I think realistically asking for an amount that they are in the business of giving is something you want to always understand. These are good questions that you want to have as you develop relationships with the funders. They'll be honest.
Any more questions that people have or comments? Feel free to raise your hand or your chat. Use your chat to type in your comments and questions for our two. People are saying thank you. Thank you, Molly and Dalvery. Both of you shared valuable information. So I don't see any more questions or comments. Oh, this is another comment from Ileana Berrios. She's saying, what is the realistic percentage of the grant for a salary?
So when you look at the grant guidelines, you will see that there are a ton of funders that do not give to personnel and salaries. But find a funder that does, you ask and you develop a relationship with them, because they are out there. There are fewer that don't mind giving towards the salary, but they are out there. You just got to keep exploring and keep finding.
People comments, this has been great. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, Molly and Dalvery, for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us today. Awesome. People have been just commenting and asking great, wonderful questions. Let me see. I don't see any more comments, any more questions. Molly, Dalvery, if you were to give somebody a consejo, which would be in English, advice. One advice that you can give our webinar participants in terms of submitting a grant, what would that be?
So my, I would have at least one person, maybe not a board member, but maybe a neutral party, someone who's a great writer, a grant writer. Maybe there's a friend that you know who's a grant writer, to review your grant, to make sure that you have someone reviewing your grant and maybe different eyes.
That's definitely a good one. You need to surround yourself with the cheerleader, a grammar person, and someone who knows accounting, because the budget page is totally different than the writing part of the grant. So you can have a team of those particular people, then your chances of getting funded and your chances of accepting the funding's decision will work out for you.
Great.
So create a team.
Thank you so much, Molly and Dalvery. Osevia, do you want to move forward with reflection?
Yes, please. So I would like to, whoever would like to share in the chat, one thing that you learn about grant writing and funding, one question that you have about grant writing and funding, and one action step you will take after these webinars, after this webinar.
Make sure that when you're typing your reflection that you're sending it to all panelists and attendees, please. We already have Carmen sharing one reflection. She's saying, accept rejection gracefully. I learned so much. The skeleton grant was very helpful information, as well learning about fiscal partners. I learned the different types of funding Surround yourself with a team and cheerleader. Learner, what to ask for and setting realistic goals. I learned to even send the thank you letter for the opportunity, even if I don't receive the grant. I will be having lots of t-shirts made and sending cards and flowers to our grantees. How to accept funding rejection. Plan to use the skeleton and continue to build upon that. I learned about accepting rejections. Data and data, the importance of it. An action I will take is building a team and relationships. Ways in which partners can assist outside of funding. From Erica Davis. Carmen Green, do you suggest grant writing business as an LLC or a non-for-profit? Assemble my dream team. I have been looking at how I can fund my nonprofit, so I use this information to move forward to securing grant and securing fiscal sponsor partner. Skeleton grant and SMART goals. Thank you all for this today. I learned to not too much for too little due to sustainability for future requests. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your reflections. We have a question from Ariel who said, will the slides be available afterwards?
Yes, they will be available in the BELA page.
I learned that we can establish a fiscal sponsorship in order to get support and guidance. I will start looking for possible fiscal partners, but I will first strive to know each other and appreciate what you have shared with us. From Damati. Sabrina Butler, this was wonderful. Thank you for this. Thank you for offering this. It was very user-friendly and informative. Thank you to everyone just for sharing your feedback. We greatly appreciate it, and for taking time to participate and be engaged. It was really helpful information. I feel confident I can apply everything I learned. From Ariel, thank you. Well, thank you to our speakers. Thank you so much, Molly Chappell-McPhail. Thank you so much, Dalvery Blackwell. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your lived experience, and sharing and answering questions with fellow leaders across the country. This was a webinar that was highly requested from a lot of fellow leaders across the country, so I hope this was helpful and useful to everyone. We will make the recording available to everyone, and thank you so much, and have a wonderful day, everyone.